I'm Craig the Geologist, and welcome to Silver Falls, one of my favorite falls here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's not one of the most powerful falls, not one of the most serene, but it is an odd one. It's a place where the river is cutting a slot canyon, very, very early days of it, through the Slate, exploiting a weak layer in the rocks and making its way down. As a geologist, that's pretty cool. Come explore it with me. I'm at Silver Falls, which is basically the very beginnings of a slot canyon. Here the rocks rise steeply from the earth, and the river cuts its path through a weak layer, basically, and winds its way through here. Not sure what a slot canyon is? That's all right. You might have missed the video I did giving a tour of a slot canyon at Pingshanhu in China. A slot canyon is pretty much just what it sounds like. It is a very narrow canyon, often very tall or very deep, and not wide at all. In fact, it tends to be so narrow that in some places you have to turn your body sideways to squeeze through, or you can't get through at all. Now, there is no scientific definition of a slot canyon. A slot canyon is just defined as being a very deep and very narrow canyon, but there aren't measurements that say, okay, well, at this width to depth ratio, it's a slot canyon, and at this, it's just kind of a term that people gave it. It's not rigorously defined. All right, I had to lose my backpack for this. This is getting pretty narrow in here. This, for those of you who are unaware, is a slot canyon. But you can't guess why it's called a slot canyon. Holy cow, that is a tight squeeze. You get slot canyons like this when torrential flooding rain cuts its way through soft rocks. And these are indeed soft rocks. I'm not sure if I can get it through here while wearing my backpack. Holy cow. Well, I did in fact make it through. But that begs the question though. Slot canyons form in soft sediments like sandstones, but these are not soft sediments. These are slates. Slate is a very hard rock. So could this become a slot canyon despite it being cut through very hard rock? To answer that, we'll have to remember that slot canyon is not a very rigorously defined term. This is a photo of Black Canyon of the Gunnison in Colorado. And sorry it's a photo and not video, but I just don't have it in my budget to fly out there on a whim. But is this a slot canyon? Well, by most definitions, the answer would be no. It's just too wide, just too massive to be a narrow slot canyon. It's not vertical enough, but it is incredibly vertical. And by some complicated measures, it is kind of the deepest, narrowest canyon in the world. Or maybe it's the narrowest deep canyon, I'm not sure. But as a geologist could tell you, based on just the look of those rocks, Black Canyon of the Gunnison was cut through metamorphic rocks. Slate is a metamorphic rock. So, could Silver Falls end up millions of years from now looking like Black Canyon of the Gunnison? The answer to that is a definite who knows. Only time can tell. But it'll depend on the future climate and perhaps more importantly on the future tectonics of the region. What we can say for sure though is that this is how canyons of this type start. If we could go back in time and visit Black Canyon of the Gunnison 10 or 15 million years ago, it would have looked almost exactly like Silver Falls. And I mean that in almost every way in terms of the topography, the climate, the vegetation. It would have looked a lot like this. But that begs the question. The second ingredient you need to get a slot canyon, besides a soft, weatherable unit to cut through, are raging floods. Do we get those at Silver Falls? Well, you certainly do. And I happened to be there for one, and it was pretty spectacular. I nearly fell in. Don't go during a raging flood, but here's what it can look like. After a moderate rain, that slot fills right up and those falls become a raging torrent. The rocks also become incredibly slippery, and you can slip and slide to the edge and fall right in and end up dying. And that very nearly happened to me. I don't mean I nearly slipped. I did slip. I slid to the edge of the rocks. My legs were dangling over the falls, and my wife had to rescue me, and she nearly slipped and died. So I mean it, don't go out there during a rainstorm. After a major rain event though, the river truly floods. It becomes a massive torrent and the Slate Canyon at Silver Falls becomes fully submerged. Let's compare calm, normal flow through the Silver Falls to flood events where the canyon is really being carved out. That is a discharge of water that can cut and move rocks. Now let's compare it to calm, normal flow again. You can see where I'm standing now during a storm. I have to be quite a bit higher because where I was standing just now, I'd be swept away.
Last time we were here, we were standing on that piece of rock down there. What you can't tell is that there's a 20-foot drop along the edge of that far rock, creating a narrow slot for it to go through. Walking along the trail, usually, obviously, we're nowhere near this close to the water. So I had to leave the trail to go around it. Another couple of inches, this trail will be unpassable.
Well, let's return to the present and talk a little bit about the rocks we see when we visit Silver Falls. As the water flows over these rocks in flood, they do get carved up. And so you're left with these small potholes and these little undulations that are really emphasized by the layering in the rock. Let me come on down here and demonstrate better from a different angle what I'm talking about here. So if this was like a plain brown rock, it might be hard to see all these undulations, all this pitting that happened here. But because these rocks are slates, you do get layering in them and coloring, and so it really brings out the bizarre way in which the water is very roughly carved this up. Basically, at this bend in the river here, during flood, the river takes a shortcut and goes right over top of it. Hence all the water erosion. If we come this way, we see the field of boulders that gets left behind as the floodwaters come through. But here we'd see another one of these really pockmarked, I suppose, pitted sheets of rock here that the floodwaters have carved out. The slates you can see best in some of the boulders that have been torn up. Here's one where you see that layering preserved very cleanly. And if we look over here at the outcrop, alright, so as I was saying, here we've got some rock outcropping right from the riverbank. And you can see the layering down here. Now it looks like that layering is extremely wavy, but in fact I think it's actually fairly flat. Might have a little bit of undulation in it, but in fact what I think you're seeing is the layers dip downward into the rock like so, and the way the rock is weathered out, you're seeing kind of like almost like topography. If we come around and have a look at the slate from this side, you'll see all that patterning on there. Those are probably fairly flat layers that are flat in relation to the dipping rock surface, which is at like, I don't know, like a 30-degree angle coming down like so. But where there is some pitting and such, you see those lines almost like contour lines. Here's another one right here. Slate is a metamorphic rock. I wrote a great article about it in Great Lakes Rock Hunter magazine. If you haven't read it yet, you should. But a slate is a basically shale, very fine-grained sedimentary rock that's been smashed together and formed these clady layers. And you can see it right here. When it weathers, you can pull them right out of the ground. Slate is actually what they make billiard tabletops out of. Covered with felt, that's a blade surface. It's also why they're so incredibly heavy to move. So this is how a slot canyon forms. Now, will it become a true slot canyon? Will it continue to deepen, go further and further down and not widen? Only time will tell. I don't know. But this is how they typically get their start. The water exploits a weak spot in the rocks and cuts its way straight down. And as long as its cutting remains vertical and the surrounding rocks are strong enough to not be constantly caving into it, it'll become a vertical feature. It'll become a slot canyon.